Hey nerds. So, gonna talk about Alex O'Connor, YouTube philosopher, and I don't know, maybe like somewhat agnostic atheist who used to be a militant atheist like me in the tradition of like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins who take their criticisms of religion way too far. But he definitely sees the appeal of Christianity from a philosophical perspective because theology is basically philosophy, which is how my opinion has changed as well. But anyway, he's debating with Dinesh D'Souza, this basically conservative Christian apologist who kind of takes the Bible literally and is completely making straw mans of all of Alex's points and missing his point. And yeah, they're arguing about the Bible and Christianity and whether the Bible is true or not. So we'll get into it here.
Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, this guy says the roof was thatched, but another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed. Contradiction. Yeah. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. The Old Testament. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that is a contradiction though, and he goes on to say that's not a contradiction. So even if, for the sake of argument, you admit that the Bible is true, that's still a contradiction. Even if the Bible is true, it can still have contradictions. To not admit that it has contradictions is pretty fucking ridiculous.
That's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history but has mythological undertones. I think that the military conquests I mentioned in my opening statements are attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that the Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so there are lots of different genres here. The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever. Maybe you can send me an email about it later or something. That's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these, and in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death.
Okay, so he's saying that these contradictions do basically sort of prove the point that the Bible is not true. And he's saying that based on the historical counts and stuff, if we're looking at historical consistency, then these contradictions are followed with historical inconsistencies, which means they're very unlikely to be true, which makes sense, right? So his argument makes a hell of a lot more sense so far. Even if you're Christian, his argument makes more sense. And he goes on to clarify his position in a lot of ways, with Dinesh D'Souza totally missing his points.
The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a contradiction.
Yeah, this is obvious, right? Or it should be obvious to any Christian, really, or anyone who knows anything about the Bible, that the Bible was written by multiple different authors over hundreds of years, all of whom had their own biases, because we're all humans and we all are biased. It's really not that difficult to accept.
If the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as...
That's just like, hey, these people said they saw this person rise from the dead. Yeah, totally reliable, bro.
Historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? But I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew.
I think I agree with what he was getting at there too, that the Bible has different types of books. Like some of them are more mythological, as he was saying, so they're not necessarily even attempting to be historical accounts. But ones that appear to be attempting to be historical accounts have historical inaccuracies. Even though they have some historically accurate information, they have contradictions too, which is a good point.
The birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that.
Well, that definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not
Contradiction about his question about contradictions.
a contradiction because, well, I mean, Thucydides
He
is
doesn't even know what a contradiction is, man. He's just not admitting that anything is ever a contradiction because he doesn't know what that means, or he's just adapting it to conform with his religious beliefs, I would say.
relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other.
Sure.
It's not as if Thucydides is, so he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus' life. And they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think
That's this is minor and maybe nitpicky, but if they were reliable, you wouldn't need 4. That's not like the reasons that the people put those gospels together. That doesn't even make any sense. You could still have 4 books that are all like accurate or like the same, basically really similar accounts from different perspectives, but that don't have all of these contradictions, right?
the way to read them.
Many more
Let me
than
say a
4.
word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean pick up the Gospel of
Which
Mark,
he is not at all doing.
the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But
yes.
crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example?
That's disputed. It's arguably decades, but it could be like hundreds of years or at least 100 years. That's disputed, like at least somewhat among theologians.
After the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without it being anything miraculous.
This is a highly debated
Yeah, he
point,
made it a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at.
What, the
if you've
resurrection?
never read the Bible, and we've all read the Bible in a way, I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete range.
I've done that too, even though like I'm not a Christian. I'd say like I'm an agnostic atheist, pretty similar to Alex, probably, but I've read the Bible like 3 or 4 times trying to look for this meaning that people talk about, and it's just boring, and I don't see that much meaning in it. It's worth reading. There's some useful, like semi-historical information. There's some good poetry. I like the apocalyptic texts, like the Book of Revelations, because they're like epic, like basically fantasy stories that have things like dragons with 3 heads and Jesus has a sword coming out of his mouth and that kind of cool shit. So if you just look at it as mostly fiction like me, that's kind of cool. But I really don't get this thing with Christians. And like, this is obvious. This question is obviously being bagged all the time, but why is Christianity better than any other religion, or even like Judaism or Islam, let alone like any other religion, like Hinduism, like Norse mythology, any other religion across the world throughout the history of the world, like indigenous or like native mythologies? There are those too, and like African mythologies throughout the world across human history.
Of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it
go back.
give you little details that don't really It's a completely different experience for me as an adult
This is good.
to go back with
Okay.
critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this
This is a stupid fucking dumb argument. It has the complete ring of authenticity. It has the ring of authenticity. All that means is it seems authentic to you, therefore you think it's true because it seems authentic to you. That's clearly nothing but you rationalizing your intuitions, which is the way most humans think most of the time, but most of us are not aware of it most of the time. This is like the most obvious biased way of thinking ever. It's a really stupid argument.
because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there, it's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will
Details that don't seem to belong there means it's authentic, or it could mean it's inauthentic. How the hell do you know which one it is, bro?
tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
There's really good fiction that has the ring of authenticity too. Doesn't mean that the gospels are fiction, but it also doesn't mean that them seeing authentic means that they were realistic rather than really well written, right? Something can be really well written but not true, obviously.
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women was disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark or I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they're the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, you know. So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that, if I may.
I definitely wouldn't say it would only make sense if that's the way it happened, but I do think that that's actually a good, well, even if it's not necessarily a good argument, it's a good aspect of Christianity and further evidence that like this traditionalist conservative interpretation of Christianity is stupid, or at the very least based on the Old Testament rather than the New Testament, which is kind of supposed to be what Christians focus on, that women discovered Jesus's empty tomb. That doesn't mean it's true, but that is very different and like supposedly forward thinking, if you want to call it that, for that time in particular. But Alex's refutal is good here too. But again, that is a fairly good point.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as...
Well, I'm not... No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument...
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts as if they are historical texts. The thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so
that's also a really good rebuttal. Like, it's like progressive, you could say, that they're mentioned, that the women are mentioned and this is stressed, but it's very important to point out that the women were always the ones who anointed the bodies, so it would have been them who discovered the not impossible, but extremely unlikely for the men to have discovered the bodies. And you might say that if you had written in the men discovering the bodies, that might make it less likely to be true. But the fact that the women anointed the bodies regularly anyway, it could mean that it's more likely to be true or more likely to be false, to make it seem more realistic, right? It's all about how you interpret it. It doesn't mean it doesn't make it more valid or more likely to be true.
The authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing. when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the event. In other words,
Yeah, exactly.
it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus' empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you've said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us.
Right.
So I don't think that this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all.
Yeah, that's true.
In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
see, like, again, it just depends on your perspective. I think that makes more sense. But again, the point is that pointing that out about the women discovering the empty tomb and the point that the women were always the one who anointed the bodies makes it actually seem like to me it makes it seem less realistic, but it's actually one of the few aspects of Christianity that I like similar aspects of Jesus. For example, he was basically a hippie who hung up with prostitutes and homeless people, contrary to what stupid conservative Christians believe. But anyway, that might be not true, but a cool part of Christianity, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? Like Alex would say that too.
so let's put together what I just said and you just said, and let's ask the question, based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings, but
He's really not doing special pleadings. You're doing special pleadings. Even if you agree that Christianity is true, he's making terrible arguments.
I would admit that the thrust of the Bible is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from revelation.
That's fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right,
A truth from revelation is not a historical or factual truth that proves the truth of the Bible. Historical truth. He's like proving Alex's own point, because like if you've seen a lot of his content, you would like suspect at least that Alex himself would say that there's nothing wrong with truth from revelation. Really, there's a problem with claiming that a truth from revelation is a historical truth, and he's trying to use the truth from revelation to justify his argument that the Bible is historically true, which obviously does not make any fucking sense.
I can't contest that because that's outside the domain of reason. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy. And because we got 4 accounts, I'm going to...
Hold on, you're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that
I did.
Women discovering
and
the
I'm
tomb.
saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that would be something you
He's just like not fucking listening and addressing straw mans.
wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree that in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know. But I'm happy to grant it. Yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know.
Yeah, a lot of these supposed facts about, well, earlier facts at least about Jesus came from this like somewhat early Christian philosopher, you could say, although I wouldn't know if he would necessarily call himself Christian, Josephus, who, arguably a lot of facts about him were added to Jesus in the Bible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like verifiable truth as he's getting at here.
So Josephus says that, okay.
Well, that's in a court of law, right?
No, but what I'm saying is, if you're applying the is it impossible for us to know, I would suggest to you it is impossible for us to know that it was the absolute and unwavering duty of women to provide all the ointments. You've stated that as a fact.
No.
I would say it's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that
Staying down a straw man again.
If somebody's reading this text and you say, well, if this were invented, why would it be women who discover the tomb? That would be embarrassing for them, the so-called embarrassment criterion. I'm saying, would it not be just, is not the fact that we're told why they're going to the tomb to anoint the body, is this not just reason enough?
No.
I mean, look, I'm not the one claiming I know how this went down, by the way. And also, you just accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
Well,
Nothing.
what I'm saying is that what I'm saying is that you have an event. These events are described with great precision and a sort of eyewitness presence there. Now, we know in some cases there weren't eyewitnesses, but there are nevertheless
Eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable, as anyone with half a brain cell knows.
described, this is the way it happened. And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah, none
Okay.
of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
No, you're not hearing from the women. I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. Now, I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry.
Well, I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed, that would completely undermine Christianity.
Are you
That's
saying
important.
that?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Of course I'm not saying
Let me
that.
ask you.
Yeah, there used to be a lot of like convenient arguments to militant atheists like I used to be that Jesus never existed. But, you know, if you look at the broad scope of opinions of theologians and historians, Jesus almost certainly did exist, but obviously almost certainly was not divine. Probably a cool historical figure in some ways, maybe less cool than it seemed like he was. Maybe he was more of a violent revolutionary, maybe he was more of a hippie. It's hard to say. Probably some combination of all of those, right?
Different
I'm saying that historically it matters. The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And so when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true...
See, he's like, Dinesh is not admitting that it is a problem even. He can't just simply admit that there are contradictions, but that's fine. There being contradictions in the Bible doesn't mean you can't be a Christian. It doesn't even necessarily mean the Bible isn't true. Maybe something that's true can also have contradictions. It's phenomenally fucking unlikely that the Bible is true. It almost certainly was written by humans over hundreds of years, and theologians, like 99.9% of them, acknowledge that. But it, like, in the grand scheme of things, Dinesh is totally missing the fucking point here and just not admitting his biases at all.
might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
No. First of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus' crucifixion? Yeah. Unknown.
Allegedly
disputed. There are a couple
sepulchre.
of potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year
Changing the subject.
was Jesus born? Unknown. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
Okay, it would not.
No.
It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have two
Another strong man that he's taking down.
guys.
No, yeah, no.
And they would get that, and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34 years old.
Right,
The issue is something.
that's a different kind, because if you could tell me that the reason why...
He's just talking about different kind of contradictions. Alex is talking about contradictions about whether Jesus was resurrected or not, which is way more important than where he was resurrected in terms of what is important to Christians generally speaking, right? That's fucking obvious.
They had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point. I wouldn't say that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false. Of course
No,
not.
but I'm saying
Firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story that the Bible tells is true.
Yeah, see, obviously, even if you're a Christian, you can believe that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. Like, most Christians nowadays actually do believe that, like, Christianity is true, but the Bible is not literally true in every claim because no one follows the Bible exactly literally, right? Like no one refrains from wearing cloth made of two different fibers or refrains from sewing two different types of of seeds in the same crop, or eating shellfish or pigs or that kind of shit, right?
Means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply,
so no, I'm not
simply
saying
saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up, and that
Notice how he didn't even explain how Alex is doing special pleading, and now he's saying made up here? That's fucking bullshit based on nothing.
engage in exactly. Let's just take,
Go
for
back.
example,
logical point. I wouldn't say that that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false. Of course
No,
not.
but I'm saying
But firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story that the Bible tells is true. It means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up, and that
it's not at all, and you're completely talked past his point again.
Could engage in exactly. Let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there
I'm going
was
to go back to my point instead of addressing what you said.
a contradiction, and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3 is 33. Hold on. And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy
pulling this shit out of his ass, man.
34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying this is basically Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's why it happened. They say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea.
Okay, and so
in other words, if the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual text, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction. And in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
actually,
Yeah, see, he's not even, but like Dinesh is not even making the distinction here between historical contradictions and like mythological contradictions or contradictions in Revelation. Like these are different things, and he's talking about them as if they are the same thing, even though he also does believe that they are different things. So he's addressing the completely wrong fucking point and ignoring all of Alex's points.
no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, come on.
It wouldn't. I'll tell you why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all.
Doesn't even fucking know what contradictions are. No, nothing's a contradiction. What? Oh, I didn't say that.
Because the gospel writers are constantly
Contradicting each other?
No, drawing, not contradicting each other. If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one.
That's a really stupid point. If they're contradicting each other all over the place, why'd you spend so much time on one point? Spending a lot of time on one point doesn't mean that there aren't other valid, similar examples. That's a really stupid argument.
Heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So
Never heard of these contradictions. You're either lying or completely ignorant and don't study this.
Which event?
This prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a plethora of contradictions, you wouldn't be spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one.
Stupid fucking argument. That is not true.
The audience has heard of either.
Hold on.
But okay, you've heard of it. Probably because you've been
such a stupid assumption.
Listening to his YouTube channel, right?
You don't think that this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospels, the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to Egypt. Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the Gospel. I'm not saying.
Dinesh, also you said why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion. Whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it
laundry list of receipts, bitch.
Afterwards. We can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial, And then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, oh, well, I haven't even heard of it and no one else really cares about this. When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the gospel. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is... when I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction, I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly...
Yeah, obviously, you can find contradictions that are more or less important than other contradictions in terms of the mythology and revelation of Christianity. Fucking duh, dude.
But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single
Yeah, I totally agree.
contradiction in these texts.
I am saying that the texts are written from 4 different points of view.
Do they contradict each
and
other?
it is quite
Yes.
possible that on details, Matthew tells you things that are not in Mark or
that's not
different
what- that's
than
not what
Mark.
I'm
Different
asking.
than Mark. Contradict Mark.
Contradict Mark.
Yes, contradict Mark. And so the point is, here's my point. You're acting... I mean, look, put it this
If you
way.
admit that there are contradictions, why didn't you just admit them in the first place and then go on to different points or examples instead of refusing to admit that time during the entire conversations, only to only to reluctantly admit it at the very end, but act like it's not important, even though that's the entire point you were discussing in the first place.
You would be scoring a point if you could say, God wrote 4 books and they contradict each other. Just like if you're able to say, Dinesh said this in the beginning of the debate and that at the end of the debate, Dinesh is contradicting himself. On the other hand, if we have 2 guys who are here...
You know, that would be a contradiction, right? And a contradiction doesn't necessarily mean it refutes your entire argument or a separate but similar point, which he seems to be impossible. It seems to be impossible for him to comprehend this.
Today to go and write an account of this debate, right? And then we look at their accounts, which are authentic, first person. I was their accounts with a lot of detail.
Yep.
And one guy says, for example, the lights were dark. The other guy says the lights were dim. Or one guy says, for example, that Dinesh was sitting at a 45-degree angle. Another guy says it was a 50-degree angle.
Yeah. But
These are
now,
not.
Now imagine,
and then
now
someone goes, Dinesh was sitting at a 43.5-degree angle because he thought.
You gave important contradictions. I gave hypothetical, unimportant contradictions.
This was a way of maximizing his rhetorical effectiveness for the audience. People would be like...
Now imagine somebody said, Alex was wearing a blue jacket, and the reason he was wearing a blue jacket... someone said it's a blue jacket, someone else said it's a red jacket. Who cares? You're quite right. But if somebody said specifically, I know that the reason he was wearing a blue jacket was because there's an upcoming election in the UK that's just been announced, and he was trying to represent the Conservative Party. And somebody else said, I know that the reason he was wearing red, and in fact he told us himself that the reason he was wearing red is because he wanted to support Labour in the upcoming general election in his home country.
Okay, perfect
You would
example.
say, that is a contradiction and means that one of you wasn't paying close enough attention, not just to the colour of my jacket, but the very message that I was trying to get across.
That could well be true, but what
Yeah.
I'm getting
It is
at is
true.
we know.
Duh. Oh, it's going to an ad. All right. Yeah, I thought that was like a really good and interesting debate. Basically, pretty one-sided, I would say. And, oh, good. It stopped on the ad there. But anyway, yeah, as usual. Oh, I'll pause it. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good debate as usual. And Alex O'Connor, he clearly has good critical thinking skills and understands philosophy. And I appreciate that he's not like a militant atheist too, like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, because I acknowledge that's dumb now too. But yeah, anyway, Dinesh D'Souza does not make good arguments for Christianity. Even if you're a Christian, he makes dumb fucking arguments. Oh, let's show this comment here that someone said. What? Oh, it doesn't show it here. Oh, wait, no, I can't show it there. Sorry. Christians also rarely think through their apologetics, kind of like when people adopt pieces of multiple conflicting conspiracy theories. That is a very good point. Like, you can have good arguments for Christianity, and occasionally conspiracy theories are true, but hardly ever. And Christianity act like this contradicting information proves their point in the same way that people who believe in a whole bunch of different conspiracy theories think that contradictions in them actually prove their point, so they connect like anti-vaxxing back to like World Economic Forum. Who knows what the hell else they're gonna connect it to, like wokeness, communism, any demon they don't like, right? But yeah, so as usual, Alex O'Connor completely intellectually destroys Dinesh D'Souza's stupid conservative Christian arguments.